It was dark and the wind was bone cold, but the whiskey kept him warm. Banfield staggered in a rough zigzag across the moor. The ground was marshy underfoot, and the sodden grass bent and danced in various directions, battered by the gale coming in off the South Atlantic. Clouds scudded past a full moon. Now and then he stopped to look at them, but watching them made him dizzy, so he put the bottle to his lips, took another swig to settle his stomach, and stumbled on. Banfield's liking for the bottle was well known here on East Island. He and his wife owned a small holding on the outskirts of Stanley, the capital of the Falkland Islands. Banfield was as tough and weathered as the sheep he farmed, but he still wore a heavy storm coat tonight. In conditions like this, he'd be mad not to. Banfield might be a drunk, but he wasn't mad. It was a lonely existence, farming sheep on the Falkland Islands. The population was tiny, and it sometimes felt as if the wider world barely knew they existed. Of course, once people across the globe had known the name of this tiny archipelago off the southern tip of Argentina. Nearly 40 years ago, the Falklands had been a theatre of war between the British, who owned and occupied the islands, and the Argentines, who claimed them for their own. Banfield had been a teenager then, but he still remembered the fear and the fighting. In his dreams he relived the arc of tracer rounds across the landscape, the boom of artillery fire. He still saw the wounded soldiers, their skin burned. He would wake up sweating and trembling, his heart racing, and he would think the invasion was happening all over again. His wife would reassure him that he had been dreaming, but his anxiety remained long after he had woken up. The only thing that eased his nightmares was the whiskey. His nighttime wanderings had become a habit. Once he had a bellyful of whiskey, his personality altered. He became angry, belligerent, and, to his mind, brave. He would not be cowed by the memory of ghosts. He would burst out of the front door of his cottage, leaving it swinging in the wind, and march across the bleak, desolate moors that had once seen all that fighting. He would raise his arms to the sky, clutching the bottle, and scream defiance into the wind. But his voice was no match for the elements, and the only ears that heard him belonged to the incurious sheep. Nobody came here on the sunniest days, let alone in the middle of a gale and in the dead of night. The lack of an audience didn't stop him, though. He would shout until his throat was raw, until the only thing to do was numb it with more whiskey. Tonight, he'd shouted himself dry, though his face and beard were wet with the salt spray the gale had lashed through the night air. The ocean was 100 metres away, and he was a good 40 metres above sea level. Banfield realised he had instinctively walked the same route he had taken ever since he was a boy, to the top of a cliff overlooking an old smuggler's cove facing east. As he battled towards it, the wind pushed him back. It screamed, banshee-like in his ears, as if warning him not to go any further. Banfield didn't stop. Even when the wind knocked him down, he got to his feet again and carried on, clutching the bottle as if it was the hand of a child in danger. He reached the top of the cliff. To his left were a collection of boulders and standing stones. As a boy, he used to hang out among those boulders with his friends, smoking cigarettes if they could find them. Now, though, he stood apart from them, a lone figure on the cliff edge. The moon disappeared behind the clouds. He collapsed onto the wet grass and stared out to sea. Banfield often thought that the ocean had a mind of its own,